London. Remarkably, Matthew Scott makes no real mention of Jumbo's rages, but evidence for these violent outbursts can be readily seen in the photos of the time. Male African elephants grow the longest of all tusks, yet in nearly every photo, Jumbo's tusks seem small or even non-existent.
He was probably a trans.
The head of London Zoo at the time, Abraham Bartlett, has left an account of what happened to Jumbo's tusks. During these terrifying nocturnal rages, Jumbo damaged not only his enclosure, but himself. On one such occasion, as Bartlett records in his book, Jumbo broke both his tusks by driving them through the ironwork of his den. The tusks were broken off within his mouth, probably close to his upper jawbone. And then, when they did grow again, Jumbo ground them down against the stonework. But what could be the cause of his nighttime outbursts and terrible acts of self-harm? Maybe his bones back in New York could contain some clues. I join Richard and John as they examine the most impressive part of Jumbo's remains, his huge skull.
One of the first things we see when we look at his skull is just how malformed his teeth are. Yeah, I mean, we can see this tooth here is really curved in this direction, and on the other side it's curved again.
So they should have been straight.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect to see the tooth bent in this kind of way in a normal, healthy elephant. We can think of elephant teeth a bit like conveyor belts. So they have 6 teeth, but only ever one of them will be in wear on each side at any one time, and another one will be coming in underneath and behind it to replace it at the time which that tooth falls out. When that tooth doesn't wear down enough, what happens is it gets stuck in the mouth and it stays there. But the other tooth carries on developing and moving up behind it. And because it's softer, because it hasn't formed properly, what happens is it hits the tooth that's impacted and bends out of shape.
You can see right here that there's this gap. All that sweet food and other inappropriate diet that Jumbo was having could have gotten stuck and even gotten into the root and the gum, where infection could have got started, or at least inflammation. Probably pretty painful, I would think.
So Jumbo had terrible toothache?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Oh, poor old thing. In the wild, African elephants adapt their diet to the changing seasons. During the wet season, grass can make up 90% of what they eat. But in drier months, they will browse on twigs and leaves and even bark. Their ridged teeth help grind down this more fibrous food, making it easier to digest. But what of Jumbo? Was his diet in captivity really as poor as his deformed teeth suggest?
Poor Jumbo.
Dr. Holly Miller from the University of Nottingham may help answer that. By taking samples from Jumbo's bones, particularly the femur or leg bone and the ribs, she hopes to discover more about his diet. These tiny samples could tell us a lot about the food Jumbo was eating and reveal whether or not that affected his overall health.
Jumbo has some interesting stories to tell. So his femur results, that gives us the diet, a broad idea of the diet for about 20 years, and the ribs a lot shorter period of that, maybe 5 to 10 years. So we're seeing his diet in London and some of his diet in America possibly, and we're seeing largely a very stable diet in that period.
Does that match with a suggestion that his diet was actually almost entirely hay and penny buns?
Yes, we're definitely seeing some suggestion that he's not getting the variety of diet that other elephants What they should have in their diet is a lot of browse. They use their trunks to access the top of trees, and they get twigs and bark, which helps them, break down the diet. The pathologies we saw with his teeth, they were coming through in the wrong angle, and they were soft. They're not hardening because they're not being used in the right way. They're not being used to grind down the right sort of food.
So it seems that elephants, just like humans, can suffer severe dental problems if they don't have the right diet. But was this having an effect on Jumbo's behaviour? Anyone who's had toothache knows that it seems worse at night when you have no distractions. So maybe this is one of the explanations for Jumbo's terrifying nocturnal rages. And maybe too it supports the story that Matthew Scott, his keeper, used to feed him lots of whiskey in order to calm him. Scott apparently had no family or close friends, and he totally devoted himself to Jumbo, even to the extent that the two of them would often drink late into the night. But Scott's unorthodox methods to help pacify Jumbo do little to calm his boss's nerves. Abraham Bartlett worries that instead of attacking his cage at night, Jumbo by day might turn on the public, including children.
I wonder if
As a
it
precaution,
happened.
he purchases a gun in case he has to shoot Jumbo.
Oh. It sounds
Bartlett
like this
becomes
might have a
convinced
bad
that Jumbo
ending.
is suffering not from toothache, but from must, a natural condition periodically affecting young male elephants when they become sexually mature. During must, testosterone levels in males can increase 60-fold, and they become extremely aggressive. The temporal glands on the head behind the eyes swell and leak, and the elephants as they walk discharge an almost continuous dribble of urine, creating a scent trail. Until recently, there was little research on young male elephants. Dr. Vicky Fishlock is one of a team of researchers who've been studying males in Kenya's Amboseli National Park, and she's now beginning to understand what drives their behaviour. Was Abraham Bartlett right about must being the cause of Jumbo's aggression?
So males in must are really signalling their competitive ability. They're really signalling that they're in great shape and that females should mate with them and that other males should look out. Must is really a way of saying, I'm here, I'm big, and I'm on a mission. I usually say they're cruising for girls in trouble.
What the hell does that
In the
mean?
wild, must usually starts when a male elephant is in his mid to late 20s. But in captivity, must can begin much earlier. And indeed, Jumbo was 21 when his night rages intensified. Could his heightened aggression come from must? Vicky is not convinced.
Must is really, for elephants, a state about dominance and establishing dominance. So if Jumbo's rages had been associated with must, you would expect that would be directed not just to his physical surrounding, but to his keepers as well, who were also controlling his behaviour in some way. So you'd expect him to have directed some aggression towards the humans around him.
But there is nothing in the historical records to suggest that Jumbo was ever violent towards people. So, was Abraham Bartlett mistaken for blaming Jumbo's increasing aggression on must? Could there perhaps be another explanation? Work in the United States with retired zoo and circus elephants may provide the answer.
So if you try here,
The behavioural behavioural problems that afflicted Jumbo more than 100 years ago are all too familiar to carers who work with the African elephants here in the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee.
It's unbelievable. I didn't realise they
The sanctuary was
would
created
have a
to
sanctuary
provide a
like
home
that.
for old or unwanted elephants across America. The elephants themselves have been captured as orphans in Africa and then kept isolated or locked up like Jumbo. When they first arrive here, many are extremely agitated and aggressive, and evidence of self-harm is all too obvious. Their tusks worn down by repeated rubbing against their den walls. The similarities to Jumbo are clear. But there is one big difference. These elephants are all female.
There isn't a Crankin house.
So clearly their aggressiveness cannot be due to a surge of male hormones. In fact, their behaviour quickly improves as they settle in and build friendships with other elephants in the sanctuary. We now know that elephants are extremely social animals. They need the company of their own kind. And we also know that they're extremely intelligent. They easily get bored. So keeping a single elephant in captivity is not a way to rear a happy and healthy elephant.
This is Mask Alabama.
There used to be one in Wellington Zoo, and as a child I remember going and having a ride on the elephant.
Didn't that one die not so long ago?
Well, it's a fair while ago later. It seemed to have died because somebody put matches in his den and he swallowed the matches. That poisoned him. I think that's the story. What was it like down on the beach?
Same as always.
Was people in swimming?
There was a bit of surf.
I think it'd be too cold. It's been rather a cold wind. But tomorrow is different. It's going to be hot, warm, and almost no wind, I think, according to the app on my phone.
Damn. I don't think there is one. is that? Oh no.
Zoo in the 19th century, Jumbo did indeed appear to be a happy elephant, but they had no idea of his aggressive darker side. Bartlett kept that a secret. And back at the museum in New York, there is evidence that his life in captivity was also damaging his physical health.
When we look at the knee, we see all sorts of kind of changes in the bone that we wouldn't really expect to see in an elephant of his age. Remember, Jumbo's only 24 and still growing. But what we see actually when we start looking at the bone surface, we can see it's really roughened, and you'll see these extra lumps of bone that shouldn't be there. You've got them on this side, and John's got them on the side of the tibia here.
Yeah, there's some bumps invading into the joint surface itself, which is not a good sign.
And what these are is these are lumps of bone at the point where ligaments are attaching to the joints, and the bone is adapting to try and compensate for all those stresses he's experiencing.
For a 24-year-old elephant, it's kind of like a 24-year-old person having similar kinds of joint problems.
Well, we know Jumbo carried loads of people, certainly children, I think even adults. Could that have produced this consequence?
Sure, yeah, loading them up with people and walking them around on a hard surface and not giving them the right diet, all these factors could spiral together and give Jumbo problems like these joint inflammation problems.
So far from being bad-tempered with his nocturnal rages, Jumbo is extraordinarily patient day after day after day to carry passengers, which is what the zoo did. There is no doubt that Jumbo was held in deep affection by the general public, but his bones suggest that he was, in effect, being harmed by those who adored him most. The stresses and strains of captivity, combined with a poor diet and hundreds of rides at London Zoo, created symptoms usually associated with old age. His bones are more like an elephant in its 40s or 50s than in its 20s. There's nothing in the zoo's records suggesting that they had concerns about Jumbo's health. But the head of the zoo, Abraham Bartlett, was still extremely worried about Jumbo's fits of uncontrollable violence. As a result, he makes a shocking decision: to try and sell the popular elephant. And he hears of a possible buyer, the famous American circus showman P.T. Barnum. News that Barnum was looking for an African elephant reached the London Zoo in the form of a telegram which said what was the lowest price that they would accept for their African elephant. Here was a marvellous opportunity for Bartlett to get rid of his problematic elephant, and he cabled back £2,000. That's over £150,000 in today's money, an enormous sum, and this register shows that it was accepted. P.T. Barnum was the owner of the popular Greatest Show on Earth touring circus, which already featured 20 Asian elephants. He was an astute businessman who had made his fortune exhibiting fake curiosities, and he wanted a star attraction to draw in crowds to his new circus. Barnum sent his head elephant keeper to collect Jumbo. And we know how difficult a task that proved to be because newspapers at the time reported in detail on this highly public event. As crowds gathered, he attached chains round the elephant's neck. Jumbo ripped them off. They attached more chains and eventually got him to the mouth of the crate, whereupon Jumbo, sensing a trap, simply lowered himself onto his stomach and sat there, and nothing anybody could do would make him budge. Both Bartlett and Barnum began to suspect that his keeper, Scott, was using some form of secret language with Jumbo to make him unwilling to leave the zoo. Could that be possible? Could man and elephant have talked to each other? Today we know that elephants use a variety of ways to communicate, but it's taken decades of field research to decode the many sounds and signals that they use. Despite having poor eyesight, elephants will use visual signals to communicate when near each other. Their ears, trunks and tails can all be used to indicate emotional moods.
Come on. Okay. Go.
In recent years, scientists have come to discover that elephants are even able to understand a gesture that we tend to think of as uniquely human: pointing. Not only that, it's been shown that they can distinguish between different human voices. So, was Matthew Scott secretly telling Jumbo to stay put?
I'm absolutely sure that in a situation where you have a one-on-one relationship like Jumbo had with his keeper, the trust that gets built up enables two-way communication.
And what happens next seems to support this. Barnum offered to take on Scott as Jumbo's keeper, to go with his beloved elephant to America, and almost immediately after this deal is agreed, Jumbo cooperated. As the frenzy about Jumbo's departure reached its peak, 20,000 people a day assembled at the zoo to protest about it. A court case was filed to try and prevent the bargain. Queen Victoria was said to be extremely upset, but the deal had been done. On the 22nd of March 1882, in the middle of the night, crowds of onlookers assembled to watch Jumbo being pulled to the docks by 12 horses, with Scott standing stroking his elephant's trunk in reassurance. Jumbo arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning down here at St. Catherine's Dock. He was loaded onto a barge and then taken out to the Assyrian Monarch, the British ship that was going to take him across the Atlantic. He drank some beer, followed by a whiskey chaser, and then the world's most famous elephant hurried from his departure. As the ship slowly sailed out the Thames, thousands lined its banks to wish him well.
Goodness. Isn't that
The
amazing?
publicity surrounding his departure had not gone unnoticed on the other side of the Atlantic, and would ensure that a huge crowd would be waiting to receive him. It was a 2-week journey across the ocean to New York City, and it must have been a horrible trip for the animal. It seems that at times he was a little seasick and had to be kept calm with alcohol. But over in America, Jumbo Mania was already erupting, and his new owner, P.T. Barnum, was keen to fuel this excitement. When the Assyrian Monarch reached the Hudson River, Barnum chartered a small boat to take him out to the ship so that he could see his purchase for the very first time. Was it really as big as he had hoped? Barnum declared, without hesitation, that this was the biggest African elephant in the world, whether that was true or not.
Lion's food. He can have food.
To discover how big Jumbo really was, we can turn to his bones again. The team will use his leg bone as a starting point.
So one of the things we can do is we can take the femur, so we can take the leg, this bone here, and we can measure the length, because this is the bone that is the longest bone in the elephant's body, and it gives us a good indication of how tall Jumbo might have been.
So how long is it?
107 centimetres.
So the circumference is 39 centimeters. We can estimate his weight at around 6,000 kilograms. That's is not obese for his height.
Jumbo is measuring in 3.2 meters tall.
And we know how old he was.
And we know how old he is, and that's really, really important. We know he's 24 at the time of his death. What we can establish is what a normal wild African elephant should be at shoulder height at that age.
And that would be about 2.7 meters. So
Wow.
3.2 meters.
He's 3.2
That's
meters.
pretty
Wow.
tall. Actually, that's 20% different.
That's an enormous difference.
Yeah, Jumbo was taller than he should be for his age.
Wow.
That's surprising.
Jumbo is about 20% taller.
Yeah, 3.2 meters is what he really was at the shoulder, and instead, what he should have been for a wild African elephant at 24 years of age would be more like 2.7.
Really?
So he's
He's a leggy elephant for his age.
So Jumbo's height was around 10 feet 6 inches or 3.2 meters at the time of his death. Evidence from wild elephants suggests they can reach up to 13 feet or 4 meters in height and will weigh almost 7,000 kilograms. But his leg bone tells us more. This zigzag line here, this crack, tells us, I assume, that he was still growing.
Yes, absolutely right. So the ends of the bone are separate from the main body of the bone when mammals are growing, and eventually they will unite when the animal reaches its full size. But we can see here, because this crack is still open, we can see that Jumbo is still growing. Male African elephants continue to grow until they're 40. So Jumbo had another 16 years of growing.
So although he wasn't quite as tall as Barnum said he was, this animal had the potential of being exceptionally big.
Yeah, he could have been a record breaker if he had had that 16 extra years to grow.
Jumbo's leg shows us that he was indeed a very big elephant. In fact, he was bigger than you would expect for an elephant of his age. He wasn't as big as Barnum claimed, but he was still growing, and he could have actually matched that claim had he lived.
New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud, and the land of giants.
She is enormous. Beautiful, isn't she?
Prepare to meet our very own monsters.
What caused New Zealand's animals to evolve to be so
The crew behind the crew. McDonald's. The evil spectre of McDonald's.